kind of curry dish with rice and some Christmas blondies. So we're gonna start by measuring out 1.5 cups of my basmati rice. And here, I need to grab a little bit more. I thought I had a whole 1.5 cups. Now we grab a little bit more rice over here on it, and we're gonna kind of cook it. This is one of those things. I have like a random measuring cup. The other couple years ago, my mom bought me these random measuring cups. So I've got like 1.5, 1 2/3, and 1 3/4 cups. So they're just kind of random. So we need 1.5 cups of rice. I'm just gonna give a little handful more because I didn't want to fill it quite up to the top. We're gonna rinse it with some water until, you know, about like 30 seconds to a minute. This is just gonna give us a better end product with this. It's gonna make the rice nice and fluffy versus kind of sticky because you're washing off a bit of that starch from the rice on there. So we're just gonna rinse it through a fine mesh strainer here. And then we'll shake any of the excess liquid off. And then I'm going to add it in my small sauce pot over here. This is a 1.5 quart sauce pot with 2 1/4 cups of water. I'm going to bring my burner on to high and I'll give this a quick little stir. And once it comes to a nice boil, then we'll put our lid on and reduce the temperature down to low. While that is waiting, let's get our blondies made so they can pop into the oven. This is a really easy and basic recipe. We are going to start with a cup of melted butter.
What's the ratio of rice to water?
So I have 1.5 cups of rice to 2 1/4 cups of water. So just your basic kind of, you know, the 1 to 1.5 ratio. So I've got 1 cup of melted butter, which is the same as 2 sticks. And then we're gonna add in 1.5 cups of brown sugar. And we don't use any white or like granulated sugar in here, just brown sugar. Make sure you have it firmly packed in. So this is 1/2 cup, so I'm gonna do 3 of these. That in there, and then I'm going to wash my hands because of course I've got a lot of brown sugar on it from packing it in. So I'm just going to rinse them nice and clean. So right now we've got 1 cup of melted butter with 1.5 cups of brown sugar. We'll mix this together. So essentially we're going to cream that brown sugar into the butter. And it's going to almost make just like a sugary paste. It kind of almost resembles a little bit like a grainy caramel. So you're just gonna make sure you have those well mixed up. Then we're gonna add in 2 eggs. So I've got 1 and 2. I'm going to poke each yolk, that way it will kind of incorporate a little bit better into our butter and sugar mixture. And we're going to just mix these, kind of cream that egg into the butters and the sugar. And this is it's such a simple blondie recipe, but it's so delicious.
How much butter?
So 1 cup of melted butter, so 2 sticks. And you'll want your butter just to cool off a little bit, so melt it and then let it sit for about 5 minutes so it's not piping hot. Okay. You can already see it's starting to resemble the texture of like a brownie. on there in the sense. So Blondies are essentially brownies without the cocoa powder. And now we're gonna add in a tablespoon of vanilla extract. So a good amount of this in here. And then a teaspoon of baking powder. Make sure that baking powder gets completely incorporated into the mixture with the egg and the butter, so that that's what's kind of going to work together, is those egg and the butter are going to work together to get it. So just, this is when you can, because we haven't added any flour, this is when you can stir.
Can you go over what yellow chicken is?
So yellow chicken is a very mild kind of curry dish. It's just, I don't know if it has an actual name, but we always grew up, my mom always made it, and it's called yellow chicken. It's kind of like a British curry, I should say, because it is a very mild curry. But you essentially start with a roux, then you make it into a velouté, and you add some curry powder, some vegetables. My mom always just added frozen mixed vegetable. I saute up vegetables and add those in there. And then, again, shredded chicken, you know, that you have leftover. You can also make it with leftover Thanksgiving turkey. That's one of those things we always made growing up as well. Okay, we've got our butter in here, or a baking soda and our vanilla in here. We're gonna add in our salt. We're gonna add in 1 teaspoon of salt. And then we'll give this a quick stir, and then we're gonna do 2 cups of flour. And you're going to use just all-purpose flour. And I'm using, so the brown sugar that I'm using is actually kind of like a hybrid between light and dark brown sugar, but typically you would use just light brown sugar with it, because the darker you get, you're going to get more of that molasses flavor on it. But I find that the Costco's like bulk brown sugar, you know, in that big bag, it's like the organic brown sugar, is kind of like a hybrid between the two. So here are our 2 cups of flour. And that is all that you need to make the base for the Blondies. So we're gonna mix these up until that flour is all mixed in here. Now this, you don't have to kind of worry about over mixing so much like you do with like a muffin, because Blondies are very kind of similar to a cookie. So they're a little bit, or like not cookie, but like a brownie, so they're just a little bit thicker and richer, so they're not fluffy. You can see you just have this nice kind of beautiful blondish dough. We're just gonna make sure all that flour gets mixed in there, so just always scrape around, because sometimes you have a pocket hiding in there. And then we are going to add in our, so I've got 2 things we're adding in. You can always go with just plain white chocolate chips, which is always like the basic on there. I'm gonna do some white chocolate chips, and then I'm gonna do some Christmas peanut butter M&Ms, because I find Blondies and peanut butter M&Ms just work really well together. So we're gonna do, let's see, we'll just use the rest of this. It's about a 1/2 cup of white chocolate chips. And then I've got about maybe 2/3 of a cup, maybe a smidge more, of peanut butter M&Ms. And then we're just gonna kind of fold those in, kind of mix them around. And again, you'll have those just nice fun pops of color of the red, the green, and then of course the white chocolate chips. Perfect. So, looks like they're evenly kind of dispersed. And now we're gonna get a 9 by 13 inch baking pan. I'm gonna spray it down. You want to use a metal versus a glass or a ceramic because the metal is going to conduct the heat a little bit better, and it's going to give you that chewier ends on it. You know, like when the brownie's got that nice chewy end. I find that the metal does that better versus ceramic and glass can give you more of a drier bake because it just doesn't conduct the heat as nicely. And then we're gonna scrape our Blondie mix into our pan. Now these aren't super thick Blondies, which is nice because then they don't take forever to cook up, which also means they're not going to dry out. You know, sometimes brownies take forever and then all of your edges are super, you know, dried out. These, they go a little bit thinner, but they've got all of that just wonderful richness of them. Now, I will say the only downside to a Blondie, just like with a brownie, is you can't eat them once they come out of the refrigerator or the oven. They have to sit for a good 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes to an hour to firm up, to give you that nice chewy brownie mixture. So you'll take them out and you're gonna feel like, oh, these are underdone. They are not underdone, it just needs to set. And they take a lot longer to set than, say, a cookie. You know how like a lot of cookies you have to just wait a few minutes before you transfer them off of the cookie sheet. So Blondies are kind of similar in the sense that you can't just cut into them right away. They have to sit and firm up first. So we're gonna spread these all the way out. And you could always reserve some of your M&Ms to pop on top if you want it to be very evenly, like perfectly popped in colors, but I like it when it's just random. Okay, we've got that. We're gonna go pop this in the oven at 350, and this is gonna bake for about 25 minutes, and then it's gonna sit in your pan for another 25 minutes before you cut into it. And this is always the hardest thing because typically, right when we're done streaming, my older two get home from school, and whenever there's a dessert, they are always like, oh, can I, you know, get into it? And I'm like, if it's something that has to wait, like Blondies or Rice Krispie treats, I'm like, you gotta wait, and they don't like waiting. They like the reward. Got a little bit of a boil on our rice, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stir. I want a good continuous boil even after I stir, which it looks like we have there. So then we're going to turn this all the way down to your lowest setting. We're going to put our lid on, and then I find just slide it slightly off of your burner. It's going to give it an even less heat on there, which will allow it to cook up really evenly. On there. Okay, let's start getting our veggies prepped for our yellow chicken. I'm going to start by adding in about a tablespoon or so of olive oil. We've got a little bit of Blondie on me, so I'm going to wash my hands.
When you get a second, can you go over the recipe for the Blondies, and do you have it posted anywhere?
So I do have my Blondie recipe posted. I don't know if this was a freebie or if this was just for our members. Now the Blondie recipe I have posted is just my basic one with all white chocolate chips instead of the peanut butter M&Ms, but you can definitely add those in. So you'll have to kind of dig and search for it on there, but I do have that one for it. But we will upload our video to the link on our page so everybody can always rewatch it and kind of cook along with me again that way. So it's kind of like a digital recipe. But I do have this one for our members. I think so on it. But for the recipe, again, it's a really, really simple recipe. You start with a cup of melted butter, and then you add kind of cream in 1.5 cups of brown sugar. Add in 2 eggs, kind of mix those up. A tablespoon of vanilla, a teaspoon of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt. Mix all of those together. Then you're going to add in 2 cups of flour, mix that in. And then 1 cup, you can either go 1 cup of white chocolate chips or half a cup of white chocolate chips. And then like, I do a little bit more peanut butter M&Ms because they're a little bit bulkier, or you could go all the way with the M&Ms on there. But the peanut butter and the Blondies just work really well together. And then you just bake for about 25 minutes at 350. And then you let them sit for a while until they kind of firm up. And it takes a hot minute before they firm up on there. And sometimes, depending on your ovens, your oven might need to cook a little bit longer on there because some people's oven runs hot or lower. Okay, we're gonna put our onions in here. I'm gonna turn my heat on to about a 6. We're gonna saute these up. And then I'm gonna mince up some garlic, but let me grab some tongs here. And we're gonna coat these up with our olive oil. So, I've kind of evolved this recipe over time from what my mom always made. So she would always just have, chop this up a little bit more. She would always just make a roux and then add the kind of the broth in it and milk. So you essentially had like a velouté sauce and then curry powder to season it up, and then shredded chicken and then a bag of mixed vegetables. Well, I like to make things a little bit more bougie, so now I've kind of replaced the mixed vegetables with some sauteed veggies because I think it tastes a little bit nicer and a little bit better. And we got to move away from the 90s bag of frozen mixed vegetables, which I feel like was everybody's side vegetable at dinner growing up. And so sauteing it, I think, just brings out their flavor, makes them a little bit nicer. And it's a very mild curry, so it's not spicy. You just use curry powder, and it just has this lovely kind of nice flavorful sauce on it, which is just really nice. Let's get our 2 carrots peeled up, and then before we dice them, we'll mince up our garlic here to get it going. Now, I'm just for my veggies, we're just really gonna do carrots, onions, peas, and green onions, but you can also add in corn, green beans, broccoli even works well in this as well. Add a little bit of our garlic in, might as well just use up the rest of this. And mince it up. And this is just gonna it's gonna play along nicely with the curry flavor. Now, the one thing that I think plays a big difference is your curry powder. If your curry powder is not like recent in your cupboard, like you've had it for a while, curry powder dulls out. So you might have to use a bit more to kind of get the flavor of it. Especially if you don't use curry powder all that often. It's just one of those spices that I do feel like that it dulls out faster than some of the others. And so if your curry powder is older, you're gonna need a lot more to get you to that flavor. It's like whenever I go and if I cook at my parents' house, I'm like, all of their spices and herbs, because I always cook all of their meals are never recent unless I've bought them. So they're typically always dulled out. But spices don't really go bad, they just dull out with time. Although I think it was funny, my sister-in-law a couple years ago did clean out her spice cabinet, and she did find some spices that were like 20 years old, and I was like, I think those could definitely be retired to the trash can. They probably had no flavor left in them, and who wants to eat 20-year-old spices anyways? Okay, we've got our garlic minced up. So once our onions have this nice kind of caramelization on them, a good little saute, then we'll throw them in. Break up any of those pieces. And then I'm doing this instead of using like a non-stick pan or whatnot. I'm doing it in my saute pan because we're going to be making the sauce that will then be able to coat over our rice. So I want a pan that has a pretty good lip, just like when I make pastas. Now we're going to dice up our carrots. Because we're doing a saute as the primary method of cooking the carrots, we want to kind of cut them up nice and small so that they will get tender on there. And these are some pretty big carrots. It's so funny. Sometimes when I buy, like, when I get the bulk carrots, I'll get a bunch of really small ones, and then sometimes I get really fat and thick ones. Recently, these last couple bags have been really fat carrots. Which means it's less peeling, but more kind of prep to make them a little bit smaller. So we'll dice these guys up. And again, smaller so they get tender faster, because their primary cook method will be the saute. Now we will throw them into our roux, or kind of our sauce at the end, and that will cook them a little bit more. But think about with fried rice, you want to kind of cook them up well. Now, dice these. I'm going to give my onions a quick little stir. We're starting to get a nice little saute up. It looks like I got some jumping onions here. I'm going to turn my pan down to about a 4 now that it's nice and hot. We're getting a good, nice little saute on each of them. Give them about a minute longer before we add in our garlic. I'd like for them all to get a little bit more translucent. I have a couple that are still opaque, which means they still have a bit of an astringent flavor to them. Once they get kind of translucent, that's when they have that nicer mellow flavor. And then we'll add our garlic, get our carrots in. And then I just have some frozen peas, because I love peas. And we'll add green onions at the very end to add kind of that fresh onion flavor. Now that our onions, I'm just throwing them everywhere today. We're gonna add these guys in. And we're gonna let the garlic saute up for just about a minute here, because you want it to kind of crisp up, but you don't want to leave it too long on that kind of that direct heat, especially with this being a metal pan versus like a non-stick coated pan. It means it gets a bit more heat and a little bit faster, so your garlic can burn if you leave it too long. You want a chance for it to kind of get those flavors out. And we're going to add in our carrots. And then I'm going to add in just a little bit of butter. With the carrots, I think it just kind of adds a little bit to the flavor on there. So just about a teaspoon of butter. And put it right there in the middle to kind of melt down that way. And can kind of caramelize those nice natural sugars in both the carrots and the onions. We'll break those up. I'm going to spread those out. And then we are going to prep up our green onions to add. We'll add the whites because I don't want to waste them. I'm going to throw the whites in now because the whites of the green onions have a bit more flavor. more astringent, so I'll cook them up now, and then we'll save the kind of the darker green parts to add at the very end. Toss those in. And just pull off any of your leaves of your green onions that are more wilted, because those will be less flavorful and more just chewy. So get these all prepped and ready to add at the very end. Give this a good mix in. Kind of coat it up. And then I'm going to be using just the good old Costco like their hand shredded rotisserie chicken. I find that this stuff is awesome to kind of cook with, especially if you don't want to go and cook your own chicken and shred it up. You can definitely use it. And then it's a huge amount, so you don't eat a whole lot. This is like 2.5 pounds, so I'm only going to use about 1/3 of it to go into our dish. But you do want to break it up some, because they are some pretty large pieces in here. So don't just break it up in there, otherwise you can get like a huge piece of chicken here like that. So you want to break it apart. If you have leftover turkey from Thanksgiving that you've already shredded off, this is a great way to use that as well. This is also what I'll use when I make like chicken pot pies, just because there's already a lot of work going into making chicken pot pies with the homemade crust and everything like that. You don't want to have to sit there and cook up a bunch of chicken to shred on top of it as well. So this helps you out a little bit. Okay, so we've got our shredded chicken here. I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse. We're going to toss in, before we toss in our chicken, we're going to add in our frozen peas. You can de-thaw them if you want, but I find it just works fine to throw them in still frozen as well. And about, like 1/2 cup to 2/3 of a cup. You don't need a whole lot, but it adds a little something nice extra to it. Again, you can also add in green beans, corn, broccoli. Those all kind of work really well with this. I'm going to turn up my pan just a little bit. And then I'm going to add a little bit of garlic salt. So we'll kind of shake over. And then I'm going to grab my pepper, because I didn't set it out. So I'm going to come over here and grab that real quick to add just a little bit, because again, this is a very mild curry dish. It's not spicy at all. We're going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Kind of coat it up. We'll let it heat up for just a second or so. And then we're going to add in our shredded chicken. And we'll let that kind of heat up as well. And then we're going to take all of these vegetables out and we'll set them to the side. And what we'll do is, in our pan here, we will we'll start out by making a roux. And then we're going to turn the roux, which is our butter and flour base, into essentially a velouté, which is by adding stock to it. We're going to add chicken stock to it, and a little bit of cream, because I like the cream to balance it out and make it a little bit kind of richer with that. And then, of course, to our roux base, we'll also add some curry powder. Now, we won't add in our green onions yet. The green onions we will add back in when we toss these vegetables back into the sauce that we're going to make. So we're just gonna kind of heat it all up. And then I'm gonna go grab a bowl or a plate that we can pop this on, or just do a plate will work. And then we're just gonna pour it on here, and we'll add this all back into ours base at the very end. But this is kind of a great way to use just the same pan for everything. So essentially keep it like a one pan dish minus the pot you need to cook the rice in. So we'll add this out. You don't have to get every little bit out, just the majority. Don't worry if there's little tasty bits on the bottom of your pan. Those will add flavor onto our roux. So I'm gonna turn my temperature down to about a 2 now, and we are going to add in about, I'm gonna say I've got 2 tablespoons of butter here. Maybe we'll do a pinch more because I want a good amount of sauce. I like mine more saucy versus like a little bit of sauce on it. I like it drenched. So we'll do like 3 tablespoons of butter in here. And then we're gonna essentially add 3 tablespoons of flour. So kind of equal parts flour and butter to make the base of our roux. And then I'm gonna grab my whisk right here. Let me grab a little tablespoon too. Once our butter is melted, then we will add in our flour, but you want to wait until that butter is melted. We'll let that sit there. And you can just kind of scrape around at those little tasty bits. Grab. Here. Again, don't go too high with the temperature or you'll have brown butter versus a nice melted butter. So pop any of those little onions that are stuck on top. And then we're going to add in about 3 or so tablespoons of flour in here to make kind of the base to our roux. And we're going to kind of whisk it together. It's going to form a little bit of a paste. And this is going to be the base of it. And you just want to let it cook for, a good at least 30 seconds to a minute to get a little bit of that flavor in here. You don't need to cook it for too long on there, but just a little bit. We're going to add a little bit of our curry powder in now so it kind of gets that direct heat from the pan. So we're going to start by doing about 2 teaspoons. And again, if your curry powder is older, you might need to go with a little bit more. You're gonna mix it in. You're gonna start to smell that kind of toasting smell from the curry, which is great. It's gonna kind of bring out those flavors and that heat to it. There. And then, let that kind of sit for just a second. I'm gonna grab a spoon for our bouillon. We're going to add that in there because you can use chicken broth, or if you have a lovely chicken stock made at home, that's great. If not, just use water and bouillon, or you can use a little bit of the store broth. I'm going to kind of put my scoop straight into my pan. That way I can instead of wasting what's in the water, I can adjust to see exactly how much liquid I need. So we're gonna give it a good little mix here. Again, keep your heat nice and low. And then we'll add in our water, mix with that bouillon that we already have in here. We'll add a little bit, kind of thicken it all together. And then we'll just keep adding the liquid until we get to where we need it to be. But little by little, don't just flood it all in there, or you won't get it to incorporate well. And then we will add a little bit of our cream at the very end to just make it a really nice kind of smooth, kind of velvety texture to it. And it kind of dulls out our, like those curry flavors to where they're just a very smooth curry. But the name is yellow chicken because it literally has like a yellow color to it from the curry powder. So, and my mom, I don't know if she named it or if it was for my grandmother, but it is not a, you know, a very adventurous name. So, turn up the heat now that we have a little bit more. And you need to do this part with a whisk. It just doesn't really work well with a spoon because you need to be able to kind of incorporate it into the roux base. And as you heat it, it will thicken up even more. I'm going to turn it up now to about, we've got it on about a 5. Clean off my spoon in there. That way I can use it to taste it, but I don't want to have too much of the chicken bouillon on it. But again, continuously stir. As you can see, it gets thicker and thicker as it. If you leave it for too long, it will thicken all the way up as it, again, evaporates out the water. So, little by little to add in there. I have a little taste now, see? Delicious. Add a little bit more of our water. So far we've used about 3 cups of the water with a big heaping scoop of our chicken bouillon. We're gonna grab our blondies out here in just a second. I'm just gonna whisk it around and then I'm gonna just turn it down a little bit lower while I step away. You can always step away from your sauce, just turn it down really low because you don't want it to boil up too much while you're gone because then you can burn it. So let's check out our blondies here and see how they are looking. They're looking pretty good. Let me check them. I just always like to give a little yep. I think they're nice and set. Let me turn that timer off. There we go. So these are beautiful Christmas blondies with our peanut butter, our Christmas peanut butter M&Ms, and our white chocolate chips. So you kind of have the mixture of both of them in there. So you have those lovely pops of red and green from those peanut butter M&Ms and then the white chocolate chips. Really simple base for this. Again, it's just butter, brown sugar, eggs, flour, vanilla, baking powder, and salt. And then whatever bougie mixin you want. But they're so simple, so delicious. The only downside is you've got to wait a good 30 minutes for them to cool down, just like you would brownies. Okay, as you can see, our sauce has thickened up a lot. See how quickly it thickens up? So we'll add a little bit more of our liquid. Kind of whisk it here together. And this roux base is honestly, if you know how to make a roux, you can make so many different sauces, gravies on there. It's just a great sauce to kind of build off of it, or a great base to build off of. And then we're gonna add in a little bit of our cream here. When we add in our cream, we're gonna get more of that brighter yellow look to it. Now, sometimes, you know, growing up, my mom would sometimes also just use milk and half stock on there. But I like the creaminess that the heavy whipping cream gives you and all of the flavor that the stock gives you. So you kind of get the best of both because the milk will kind of dilute it out a little bit. And I added about, I want to say like 1/4 of a cup of cream, not very much, but you can see it just makes it a nice kind of brighter color to it. Perfect. And now, slide that over here. We can add our sauteed veggies back in here. We don't need our whisk anymore. So you see we've got a good, you know, probably a good amount of our sauce here. We're gonna add this back into our sauce. So this is our sauteed up onions, garlic, carrots, peas, and then our shredded rotisserie chicken. And we're gonna kind of coat it up with that sauce. Beautiful. We'll mix it around. This is, again, great to use if you have leftover rotisserie chicken, leftover turkey on there. It's just delicious. And then we'll throw in some of our fresh green onions to add just a nice little pop of fresh onion flavor. You always want to add those right at the end so you get that freshness from them, because if you leave them in or put them in too soon, it kind of cooks out all that flavor. Beautiful. So here is our yellow chicken base.
You have a question? Do you have to shred the chicken?
I have found that it is best with shredded chicken. Now, I have made it before with sauteed chicken. It just doesn't have the same kind of texture. And I don't know if it's just because what I always had growing up was shredded chicken. And so that's just what I like. But to me, it has to be shredded chicken. It just isn't the same. And I think it's a bit more tender and it falls over the rice a little bit nicer. Let's get ready to serve up our lunch here. So our rice should be just about done. Now we'll slide our blondies over here, but again, remember, this is where you've gotta wait and have a delayed gratification because they are gonna sit there. But look at our beautiful blondies with that nice golden brown color to them. Delicious. And they'll be ready to serve up. Let me grab my shovel for my yellow chicken and throw rice. With your rice, the way to keep it nice and fluffy is to just like you would with quinoa, you're gonna wanna just fluff it with a fork. That way it doesn't stick together, but you see how it can get nice and fluffy. So you can get that wonderful rice as if you have a rice steamer, but on the pan. Okay, so just fluff it. Try not to stir it because that's when you're gonna get it to clump together. So for lunch today, we have our jasmati rice. We're gonna make a nice bed of it on the base of our bowl. And we are going to top that off with our creamy yellow chicken made with sauteed onions, carrots, garlic, peas, rotisserie chicken, and a creamy curry sauce made with chicken stock, curry powder, and topped with green onions for this very mild but very flavorful kind of chicken and rice dish that is not like an Indian curry, but more like a British curry. And then for dessert, once they have finally set, we will have our blondies made with our Christmas peanut butter M&Ms and white chocolate chips for that little touch of sweetness. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made, our yellow chicken and our Christmas blondies, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my all-clad saute pans, my knives, my cutting boards, all of my bakeware in there as well. But again, thank you so much for joining us here.